everyone, and welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. The charges against Empire actor Jussie Smollett were dropped, and I literally have no idea what's going on, so I'm going to bring you in on that confusion. Trump and the DOJ want to kill the entire Affordable Care Act, so we're going to give you the latest on that debate. And we will give you updates on a measles outbreak, a major measles outbreak in Rockland County, New York. But first, here are your headlines.
The owner of the New England Patriots, Robert Kraft, has now pleaded not guilty on 2 counts of solicitation of prostitution in Florida. He's also asking for a jury trial in his case.
As we wait to hear whether former Vice President Joe Biden will run for president, he publicly apologized last night for the way his Senate committee treated Anita Hill back in 1991. Biden was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee when Hill accused then Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment. During an event in New York last night, Biden said,
"There are a bunch of white guys hearing this testimony in the Senate Judiciary Committee. So when Anita Hill came to testify, she faced a committee that didn't fully understand what the hell it was all about. To this day, I regret I couldn't come up with a way to get her the kind of hearing she deserved."
The monster Powerball jackpot is up for grabs tonight, and nobody has won it since just after Christmas, and that's driven the price to at least $750 million.
I'm Lama Hassan, standing outside Kensington Palace in London, where the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are still living, even though by now they should have moved to their new home at Frogmore Cottage in Windsor, right around the corner from where they had their wedding last year. Now, we understand that the parents-to-be are still working, Prince Harry carrying on with his official engagements. Meghan, even though she's on some sort of maternity leave, is still working behind the scenes. Now, they're trying to get their new home royal baby ready for baby Sussex. They want it to be just right, but last-minute renovations are still going on.
All right, so even as we were reporting the breaking news on Jussie Smollett yesterday, I was in complete shock. I mean, all of his charges were dropped, his name was cleared, and the records are sealed. I read the updates, we reported the updates, and yet you and me still have zero idea about what actually happened. And the same goes for Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel. So here he is on GMA this morning. Take a listen.
All over the city of Chicago, George, there are signs on front yards and windows that say, "Hate has no home here." He turned those values upside down and inside out.
A lot of people wondering.
He abused the city of Chicago. He actually committed a crime here. He lied about something. Let's get to the bottom of this. Let's find out what happened. He violated everything that every principle, and especially a city that embraced not only him as an actor, but more importantly, the values of being able, whoever you are, whoever you love, whatever your background is, you have a home here. He took that, turned it around, and tried to self-promote himself. And the fact is, he's walking around with no sense of contrition, no sense of remorse. And the fact is also, the state's attorney is saying he's actually guilty of this hoax. He's walking around saying, "No, I'm innocent."
All right, so I want to go to Alex Perez, who's in Chicago. Alex, really the only question everyone has is, what happened? What's going on?
Well, Kimberly, everyone in Chicago and the millions of people who have been following this story over the last several weeks are baffled about the prosecutor's decision. Now, here's the thing. It's not unusual for prosecutors here and in counties across the country to dismiss charges when it comes to non-violent cases. But what's unusual about this case is that this is not like any of those cases. There were dozens of investigators who were working this case for several weeks, at some points around the clock, to try to get to the bottom of what happened here. A grand jury charged him. A grand jury charged him with 16 felony charges. So there are a lot of things that don't apply in this case, that don't apply to other cases. So why exactly the prosecutor prosecutor decided to make this decision and drop those charges still remains a mystery. The only thing he has said on the record is that this was a non-violent offender case, and they do this with cases like this one, and that's what happened here. Now, Jussie Smollett and his team are sort of playing a game of semantics here with the words. You know, he's saying he's innocent. He's saying he never lied. But if you talk to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor has talked to the media, he says he believes Jussie is guilty of the crimes that he was accused of. He believes he committed those crimes, but for some reason, he chose not to prosecute them and instead went with this deal, this agreement that they reached.
Yes, and what's up with the community service? Because apparently he did some hours at Rainbow Push. Why are you doing community service if you're innocent?
Well, you know, that was part of the deal that he made with prosecutors. They would dismiss the charges if he did community service and if he forfeited his $10,000 bond. He agreed to do that. By the time we learned that the charges were going to be dismissed yesterday, they told us that he had already completed that community service over at Rainbow Push. Now, if you look at the list of things he did for community service, you know, a lot of people might roll their eyes at that. He was mentoring broadcast students. He was helping the choir at Rainbow Push. He wasn't doing the things that a lot of people are used to hearing when you hear the words community service or hard work or things that might make you reflect on some things. So even the community service, the people who are watching this are being highly critical of that portion of all this.
Yeah, and they say that all of the records have been sealed, so I'm curious if we're ever going to get the details. I mean, there's still questions about the brothers and then the letter that was supposedly sent to him. When do we learn about this information?
So we have so many questions, and that's right, we may never learn the answers. We were inside the clerk's office down by the courthouse yesterday trying to get some of those documents, trying to that were filed in courts. We were told to come back within a matter of time because they had not been uploaded to the system yet. So when we come back, we talk to the manager there. She looks in the system, and all of the paperwork, all of the documents involved with this case had disappeared, completely gone, vanished. The judge did order that the details be sealed, but for it to disappear this quickly is highly unusual. So that means there are still a lot of questions that may never be answered when it comes to the details of this entire case. Kimberly?
All right, Alex, thank you so much. A mystery for sure. All right, so we're moving on to Boeing, where the company is still working on a software fix for the 737 MAX 8 plane. So I want to go to David Curley, who's in Renton, Washington, at the facility where Boeing actually builds these planes. David?
That is a 737 MAX. This is where Boeing builds these aircraft. And today it is trying to resell this aircraft to 200 of its customers after those two deadly crashes. In essence, Boeing is explaining a software fix for the 737 MAX that still must be approved by the FAA. What's this all about? Well, we know in the first crash, Lion Air in Indonesia, that it actually activated an anti-stall system. Now, Boeing, with this new MAX, it has bigger engines on it, and they're a little bit forward on the wing. So that forced the plane, when it was flying sometimes, to nose up a little bit, which the engineers were concerned about. So they added this safety system, this anti-stall system, that uses an angle of attack sensor on the outside of the aircraft. In the Indonesian air crash, that sensor was set incorrectly. It sent bad data to the computer, which changed the horizontal stabilizer. That's the horizontal tail part of the plane, which nosed down the aircraft. The pilots fought it 21 times, lost the battle, and crashed that Lion Air aircraft. So this fix that Boeing is talking about is, instead of taking information from just one sensor, there are two, one on each side. So it'll be two sensors that will go to the computer to determine whether the system is activated. If it is activated, the yoke, the control column, will move forward only once. In the Lion Air crash, it was repeated every 10 or 15 seconds. It would move forward. It will only do so once with this new software. And Boeing is adding a feature that it has been charging for on the display. If those two sensors outside disagree, a little light will come on and tell the pilots that the sensors are feeding bad data to the computer. So all this software being explained to customers today. The FAA expected to approve it sometime next week. Some training will be required. The big question, When will this fleet be back in the air? When will the grounding be lifted? And in the meantime, we should learn more about that Ethiopia crash later in this week. Investigators there are expected to tell us what they believe happened in the second crash and whether these two crashes are related. Kimberly?
All right, David, thank you for those updates. So a huge move, as we reported, the DOJ and the entire Trump administration now want to kill all of the Affordable Care Act, a move that will significantly impact the people of this country. And after the Mueller report, it puts the health care debate back in the political spotlight. So here to break it down is Karen Travers at the White House, and we have John Parkinson, who's on Capitol Hill. Karen, can you just give us a recap of why and how this is going to impact the people of this country?
Well, the when is the big question too, Kimberly, because right now this is not an immediate change. But what happened earlier this week is that the Justice Department filed a legal brief saying that the administration agrees with a federal judge's decision in December that because the individual mandate of Obamacare is unconstitutional in this judge's view, the entire law should be struck down, should be invalidated. And that would mean it goes away. Everything is scrapped. This now sets up a very big political fight. The president yesterday was asked by our colleague Mary Bruce what his message is to the millions of Americans who are worried now about their health care. And he said Republicans will soon be the party of health care. But when she asked him what is the Republican plan if Obamacare is suddenly invalidated, he didn't answer that. And Kimberly, that's because there isn't a plan right now. And this is an interesting move by the White House at this time, given that the president is on this big victory lap from the Mueller investigation ending and that complete exoneration in their view. Now Democrats say we're going to talk about health care, and they're going to slam the administration for what they say is going back on promises to protect people with pre-existing conditions, and also what happens to those millions of Americans who get their coverage through Obamacare.
Yeah, Karen, so I want to go to John. John, you're on Capitol Hill. How are the lawmakers reacting to this?
Yeah, I've really been surprised that they've been talking about this just as much as the Mueller report's conclusions and the Attorney General's letter there. So I think that, we're getting a lot of members of Congress that are upset about this in the House Democratic majority. Yesterday, we saw that Democrats are looking to find ways to strengthen the Affordable Care Act. They introduced legislation that would lower drug costs and also, support people with pre-existing conditions. And this morning, I was walking around and just trying to see if I could get some sound from members of Congress. And I think we've got that teed up, some video here, sounding off here on the DOJ's decision.
Well, what we're trying to do, I think, is respond immediately and have a legislative response as things work their way through the courts. We're trying to shore up and strengthen the ACA.
Were you pretty shocked that the administration took this move, or is this like just, you think, the next thing after the Mueller report?
I'm not shocked because this entire administration and the Republican Party seems hell-bent on making healthcare more expensive and skyrocketing prescription drug prices because they care more about corporate profits than they do about the livability and cost of living of American people.
Obamacare hasn't worked for the American people. We've seen rising prices, we've seen worse health care outcomes in many cases, and we've seen a private market collapse in terms of choices for the American people. So we definitely need a better system, and hopefully we'll be able to get that going forward.
So this is going to be challenged in the courts. It looks like it could be a big 2020 issue. Are you ready to go to bat for this, and what do you think it's going to play in your district?
Well, we have yet to see the timetable that the court will have at looking at these issues. Frankly, I think the American people have suffered under Obamacare for far too long, and we shouldn't have to wait for the courts. We should get legislation moving that can improve choice and that can lower cost.
Yeah, you heard Republican Matt Gaetz right there talking about moving forward on some sort of other plan, but we have yet to see any sort of details from the Republican Party. They're in the minority here in the House, so you really think that anything that's going to get some momentum here in Congress is going to have to come from the Senate, from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and he's going to have to come up with something with the White House that can fly. And if you're looking to replace it, you still have a House Democratic majority, which is going to complicate things. That's why I really think this is going to play through the courts, go into 2020, become a huge election issue, and then maybe at some point you can get something not divided Congress and government and see if one party can change it in their own direction.
Yeah, John, it's looking like it's going to be the issue. So I want to go back to Karen. Karen, you do a lot of interviews with radio affiliates. What were they focusing on today when you were speaking with them?
Yeah, the big question, Kimberly, is, what happens right now? Is there any immediate change with this move by the Justice Department and this new position by the Trump administration? The answer to that is no. Nothing changes at this moment, but now this is going to be a very big topic that Democrats and Republicans are going to be debating, as John said, from now until the election year. And, the president last year on the campaign trail in the midterm election season said that Republicans would not get rid of protections for people with pre-existing conditions. The president promised this at almost every campaign rally, sensing that this was going to be a big issue for voters and also seeing that Democrats were talking about this at every stop. And now that's a promise that he made last year, and they're going to have to figure out a way to keep that. If Obamacare is invalidated, there's nothing waiting in the wings to guarantee that those protections would stay in place.
All right, Karen. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, John. We appreciate it. All right, so as I mentioned, there's a measles outbreak in this country, and in an extraordinary move, Rockland County, New York declared a state of emergency over the outbreak there, banning all non-vaccinated minors from public places for at least 30 days. So I want to bring in Dr. Jamie Feltzer with ABC's medical unit. Dr. Feltzer, can you explain this outbreak? Measles has been cured, but these cases keep popping up.
Sure. So this measles outbreak started about 6 months ago. There were 7 international visitors to Rockland County. And since that time, they've had about 153 cases. Initially, they started getting the outbreak under control, but in the recent months, the number of cases has surged again. They've given out about 17,000 doses of MMR vaccination, but still there are many people that are unvaccinated. And the majority of the cases that are occurring are in unvaccinated youth. So that's why they're making it mandatory for all under 18s to get the vaccination.
Can you remind us why measles are so dangerous?
Sure. So measles can cause many complications. About a third of the people that get measles will have complications from this. People can get pneumonia, they can have hearing loss, they can get severe neurological complications. They can be acute or they can be chronic, occurring even 10 years after someone had the measles.
Interesting. So, as we said, Rockland County is doing a ban. How does a ban actually work? How do you keep people from going outside?
Right. So this is a good question. And they stated yesterday that people were not going to be required to carry around their vaccination cards. It was more going to be enforced based on parents. And this was really to encourage parents to have their children vaccinated. There's not going to be anyone checking for vaccinations, but they really, really want to encourage people to have their children vaccinated. And they expect that the ban will last about 30 days. They will have an opportunity to renew it depending on if people are actually becoming vaccinated or not.
All right, Dr. Feltzer, thank you for the information.
Thank you.
Yes. So I want to move on overseas to Africa, where a major Ebola outbreak is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the second worst in world history, with over 1,000 cases and over 600 deaths. So I want to bring in Tariq Rebel. He's the Emergency Response Director for the International Rescue Committee. He's in the epicenter of the outbreak right now. He's on the phone. Tariq, how big of a role has the increase in violence in this region played into this outbreak?
That's an interesting point. I think in general, we're seeing an uptick in the number of cases the past week or so to about 7-8 cases per day, but we think the actual numbers are even higher than that. Those are just the confirmed cases. In terms of the violence, it's been a constant problem in terms of accessing areas where the outbreak is taking place. So we have to sometimes cease activities for a while. And obviously, there have been attacks on Ebola treatment centers that have severely hampered the response in many ways.
Can you just give us a refresher about how Ebola spreads and how fast it's actually spreading there?
Sure. So Ebola usually is transmitted between animals initially, and then once it passes on to humans, it's actually quite hard to contract initially. It's only through bodily fluids, so blood, sweat, tears, that it's contracted. So usually it's passed on to loved ones and family members. Once that happens, it's highly infectious. So if people don't take precautions, it can be passed on rapidly before it's detected. One of the key issues is that the symptoms are quite ambiguous, so very similar to malaria or typhoid, which are endemic in this part of the world as well. And since that has started now, we're seeing constant transmission. We're seeing people still not following precautions the way they should.
Yeah, so I'm really curious. I mean, you're there in the epicenter, and I just want to know what it's like walking through a town that has this serious of an outbreak, and how are you keeping yourself safe?
Right. If one does take the precautions, generally the risk can be minimized to a very acceptable level. So we, for example, have a no-touch policy. So if you could imagine, you basically don't touch anyone. You don't shake hands. You don't give hugs. You don't tap people skin to skin in any way. So that's the easiest way of preventing any sort of contamination. In terms of actually working currently in the epicenter, we obviously take all sorts of precautions for our staff who are working in the health center and hospitals, dealing with patients that are suspect cases. But overall, it's very worrying. People are very tense. There's a lot of rumors that go around about Ebola and what it is and what it's not. And in general, a lot of tension between the community and different parts of the response.
All right, Tarek, thank you so much. Yes, a devastating situation there. Thank you. So in the meantime, officials at the border say they are on track to make over 1 million migrant apprehensions by the end of this year, a number that's not been seen since the early 2000s. And in fact, the numbers are so large that some migrants are actually being housed under a highway overpass in El Paso. So I want to go to Jim Schultz, who's in El Paso, with a closer look. Jim?
Hi, Kimberly. It's Jim Schultz along the Texas-Mexico border in El Paso, Texas, where we are awaiting a press conference by Customs and Border Patrol later this morning to give us some details on the crush of migrant immigrants that they have received here in El Paso of late. Some reports we've heard of 4,000 just last night. Hopefully we'll have some clarity on those numbers. But I do want to kind of give you a nickel tour. This is the El Paso El Juarez bridge, that Juarez, Mexico on this side and El Paso, Texas on this side. And Customs and Border Patrol agents that are telling us that they have been so overwhelmed, they've had to process the throes of migrant asylum seekers to under bridges here, and I just kind of want to give you a sense of kind of what that looks like. This is the bridge that actually connects El Paso and Juarez, and they've basically chained off this area. This is an area where we were here last night, and it's just basically a holding center. There's they can get initial medical screening. There's restroom facilities, and of course the silver mylar blankets that we've kind of gotten used to seeing in terms of the migrant processing center. And here's actually one that actually kind of blew out, so it's just very thin kind of protection for them. But so hopefully we'll have some clarity in terms of the numbers here in El Paso. As you recall, President Trump was just here earlier this year declaring El Paso safe on account of the border fence that was erected here in 2008. City officials have pushed back on that number. The mayor told us that El Paso has always been safe, and despite the erection of the fence. So, of course, El Paso, Texas is the hometown of Beto O'Rourke. He's been very vocal about what's happening down here. So hopefully the commissioner from Washington, D.C. will give us some good numbers, and we'll report back to you as to what they are and if the situation has changed.
All right, Jim, thanks for keeping us updated. That's unbelievable. So I think I should give you a little bit of good news, something to be happy about. Well, a pair of the cutest sea otters, baby sea otters, were rescued in California. And you didn't know you needed to see this, but you will be glad you did. So we'll revisit Atlanta with this story. Will?
Kim, I'm in Atlanta at the Georgia Aquarium alongside my new buddy Gibson. He is a southern sea otter, just 5 weeks old, and he was rescued off the coast of California in a storm. He was separated from his mother, and the good folks at the Georgia Aquarium here, led by Dennis Kristen, rescued him, brought him here where he is going to be in his new forever home. He's got a pal named Mara, who they also rescued off the coast of California. This is all part of a show upcoming on Animal Planet. It's called The Aquarium. And Dennis has been so kind to take us around to teach us the ways of otterhood. I spent the day feeding them and playing, and as you can see, that's not a very bad job. Gibson is incredibly cute, and he's incredibly rambunctious right now. It's feeding time for him, but since I am joined by Dennis, thank you for being with us. What exactly happened to Gibson to bring him here?
Yeah, sure. Gibson was unfortunately caught with his mother in a pretty significant storm event off the coast of California, and he was separated. The waves were reported to be about 20 or 30 feet, and unfortunately he washed ashore and was reported to a stranding facility. Rescue response teams went out to try and find him and reunite him with his mom. And after repeated attempts, they could see the mother, they could hear the mother, they were calling, but the storm was just too strong to be able to get him reunited with his mom.
So that's so tragic, but he's now got a great home here. How exactly did he and Mara physically get here?
Yeah, so Mara, we had responded and are working with a partner facility, a stranding facility out in California. They had responded to Mara, who was a very similar situation, caught in a storm event, separated from her mom. Attempts to reunite were unsuccessful, and so they brought her into the stranding center to stabilize her. And we had staff out there for almost 2 months caring for Mara and preparing her for her move to Georgia Aquarium. And it was about a week before we planned to move Mara that Gibson had stranded as well, and there really wasn't any room for him, and so his fate was pretty uncertain for a little bit. And we realized that we could help him and provide a home for him, and that's why he's here. And he's in a gear right now.
He's having a grand old time, and so are we. We're happy to see that Gibson and Mara and all the other animals here are under great care at Georgia Aquarium, courtesy of Dennis. And not a bad gig, to be honest, scrubbing up in the quarantined area in the basement of Georgia Aquarium, spending the day with otters, Kim.
Now, if that doesn't make you smile, I don't know what will. All right, my friends, I hope you continue to take care of yourselves. And if you're around, stick around. We're going to have the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. And then you can join us for World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. I'm Kimberly Brooks. I'll see you tomorrow.